Hi guys, I'm going to show you how to do this folded over binding technique just like on the Designs by Ajaire Crossroads dress. It's also used on the sleeveless version to finish the arm side, but I'm going to focus today on the neckline. Okay, you're going to start with sewing the binding together. That'll end up being the back neckline. Make sure it's pressed well, and you find the 4 midpoints. So you use the notch that you took in the center front and you use the center back, and then I put those together and pin the other 2 points. Then you're going to sew the front and back together. I've already got that done. This is for the shoulders there. So this is the neckline. So this is the back part, this is the front, and you're going to want to press the shoulders back. Then you're going to attach the binding with the right side of the binding. So if there was a print that had an upside down, right side up, you would want to make sure the right side of the binding was facing the wrong side of the neckline. And then just pin that on. All the way around. So now you're going to take that and you're going to stitch the 2 layers of the binding to the 1 layer of the neckline using a stretch stitch. Okay, so now the neckline is sewn on. This is the right side of the dress. This is the wrong side. And what we want is we're going to be folding over the binding like this. So that's how it's going to look when it's finished. So first we need to press up the stitching. And again, this is the right side of the dress. And I find it's easier to press from the wrong side. So what I do is I pull the stitching up with my fingers like that. And so on the ironing board, I know all along the edge there, I can feel with my fingers that it's pressed up. So I press that with my iron. I'll also use a Tailor's clapper sometimes if the fabric's thicker. Just a piece of wood, but it really helps seal in the steam and it helps that to lay flatter. You can see it's a little flatter there. Obviously if your knit is a little more delicate, you're going to want to use a pressing cloth. I know that this knit presses pretty well. So again, I'm going to press up the whole way along. Make sure the shoulder is still facing toward the back, that shoulder seam. And just continue along like this. This step is really important because it makes stitching down that binding a lot easier later. Pressing helps everything to lay just right. So even though I skip a lot of steps when I sew, pressing has become one that I just don't skip at all. I used to. The more I sew garments, the more pressing is a step I take seriously. Again, it spots like the shoulder. When I press that, sometimes I'll use the clapper to just kind of push it down. Because ultimately when we sew through, we're sewing through 5 layers. So we have the 2 layers of the binding, the layer of the dress neckline, and then 2 more layers of the binding. So it's quite a few layers, and unless your fabric is thinner, it can be tricky to stitch it down. So just pressing like this all along, and occasionally using something like a tailor's clapper makes a big difference. So now that that's done, I'm going to flip it back to the right side. You can see even just here, that neckline, the seam I mean, is wanting to lay the correct direction. Even the tough part here with that back seam, on its own, it's wanting to lay correctly. Now here, you can press over the binding. You want it to go about a ½ inch for this pattern, and you're going to stitch right along there. You want to cover the stitching. See this white? I used white in my serger. You're just going to cover right over that so nobody sees that. And you can press that down because again that helps it just have a memory of where it's supposed to be. It can be a little trickier. That's why I'm using a sleeve smaller ironing board, because even with the larger necklines, this is a size 6, so even with the larger necklines that could go around my regular ironing board, I use the sleeve just because it helps keep it all together, these smaller sections, because of the curve of the neckline. And I do this before pinning. Actually, to be honest, I don't end up pinning at all because it gives enough of a memory. But certainly, if it's your first time doing this method, or if you're nervous at all, pinning is completely fine. But I do this, even if I'm going to pin, I do it ahead of time and don't pin as I go, because then I don't have to worry about pressing over the pins. And like I said before, you're really just giving it a memory of where that knit wants to fold over. Paying special attention to the shoulder seams and this tricky back seam, because that is a thick area there. That area I especially generally hit with the clapper. And I'm using steam on my iron, pretty hot setting. Again, test your fabric first. Generally, I use just an old piece of a sheet that I know holds up to pressing as a press cloth. So you can use that if you've got a delicate fabric. So now that that's pressed all the way around, I'm going to go, and I'm using a cover stitch, but you can certainly use just a stretch stitch on your own machine. The key is making sure your stretch stitch will actually allow the neckline to stretch. Many stretch stitches don't have that much stretch, so you want to test that out because this is a neckline and you want it to be able to go over your child's head. And there you have a nicely finished neckline. As I said, I used a cover stitch, but a regular stretch stitch would work fine. Now I'm going to complete this Crossroads dress. This is a sleeveless version, so I'm going to do the same thing on the sleeves. Follow the exact same steps, just sew the side seam together first and use the arm side instead of the neckline.